Welcome back to another episode of Managing Sexuality Intelligently. I'm Jason, and I'm here with Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
My name is Stephen Ng. Thank you.
Yes. And what we do here is I present a topic to Steve, which I have planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. All of the topics we discuss are interrelated in one way or another and revolve around Steve's life work, which involves the intelligent management of sexuality.
Rah.
That sound about right?
Hooah. Yes.
Today we're discussing the abuse-free life. Abuse, as Steve likes to say, is not normal. Who would have thought? Abuse can include physical and emotional abuse, such as yelling, name-calling, put-downs, and other controlling behaviors like telling someone they should dress or who their friend should be. And learning how to live an abuse-free life is an amazing opportunity to leave all the drama behind and live a more positive, connected, and fulfilling existence. Before we get into that, if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. Usually at the end of each episode, Steve answers a listener question, but today the question kind of revolves around this topic of the abuse-free life. So I'm going to kick it off with the question, and then from there we'll go into the conversation.
All right. Looking forward to this.
So the question is, my partner has an explosive temper. What is the best way to bring up the topic of an abuse-free relationship? He's hypersensitive to criticism and always gets defensive right away. So I feel anxious that by bringing up the subject, we'll start an argument. How should I go about addressing this?
Don't ever bring it up.
Don't.
I think, no matter what advice I might suggest today, there's no foolproof way of doing that with someone who's given themselves license to be abusive. And I think, though, like so many other problems in life, success begins with starting with myself. And I need to call abuse by its name, not a bad temper or an explosive temper, because even though that's like approaching a good description, it still minimizes the behavior because it isn't about having a bad temper or occasionally acting out with your temper. It's about abusing the person you're talking to. And that's that really, it's funny that we're even talking about this because it comes up every week in my therapy office. And it is part of managing human sexuality intelligently. And people might wonder at that, but it's true for at least two reasons. And I really want I'm saying this at the beginning of the hour of conversation because I really want people to take a moment, maybe even write this down. As simple as it is, there are two reasons for considering domestic violence in all of its forms, verbal and physical and sexual, as a sexual issue. One is before she and I can have a good relationship, we must first have a safe relationship. Mm-hmm. So without that, it's impossible to go forward and have a good relationship. And I think by this stage, if you're listening to these podcasts, you understand that these kinds of relationships are sexual in nature. They are, even if we decide to not have sex because we're both ill or infirm or we're both asexual, the nature of the relationship is a mutual attraction to one another. The second reason for considering abuse in the home or abuse in a relationship as a sexual issue is it has to do with love. When we talk about domestic bliss and marital relationships, and that includes marriage by any other name, like just shacking up or living together, it has to do with love. And I know that there are people who hurt us or say horrible things or do horrible things to us. They apologize later and they say, but I love you. But this is a little bit like going into some dark cult like the Baptist Church and saying, where they say, we love you with the love of the Lord. And then as the months roll forward, that very benign sounding phrase becomes rather sinister because a lot of what follows is a behavior that's not particularly loving. So if this abuse you're dishing out is love, could you please love me a little less? It's really what I'm thinking. And it's not love. That's the whole point of what I'm saying is any sort of abuse is not a loving behavior. So it makes us crazy because supposedly we are in a loving relationship. That's the whole basis for coming together, is that this person treasures me, values me, respects me, and wants me to be a partner in their life as we face the challenges of living in this world together by combining our resources and facing those challenges as a team. We're going to be better able to overcome them. And love is the glue that cements us together. But domestic violence is, and all the other forms of abuse are a counter theme to that whole notion. And so with abuse, there is no love.
What about for the people who believe that it is love and that want passion and yelling and view that as something that is a connection? Is that
Yeah, I've heard a lot of those people in my office, and they even accuse me of not really loving my wife because
Mhm.
if I really loved her, I would get more upset if she did something.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
when I get upset, then I would show my upset feelings by yelling at her, screaming at her, and
Hmm.
calling her some rather profane names. And I no, that's I can get angry without abusing people. And this goes back to, for me as a child, I was a horribly abusive big brother. And at the time, I kind of considered it my God given right as a big brother to abuse my little brother. But
And what were you doing to him?
oh, yelling at him, screaming at him, pushing him around, bullying him, hitting him, kicking
Mm.
him, all of that stuff. And basically just ordering him about and controlling him. And it's, and I knew that all this behavior was wrong at one level. But I also was too immature to have any other idea what to do. And we were
Mm.
pretty much raised without parents for much of the time. So it just gave me a rather sick sense of control over a life where I felt no control. So
Mm.
that mirage of control was like very appealing to me. And now I forgot where I was going with this.
Well, just about how couples sometimes say, this is
Oh
about
yeah, that's right.
passion and yelling and all that.
It's funny thing about abuse is that I know that I can, from personal experience, I know that I can be very angry and not be abusive, and
Hmm.
I can be very abusive and be cold blooded and not angry at all.
Hmm.
They're two separate entities, and that's despite the movie title Anger Management and all the court ordered counseling referred to by the same term. It's not anger management. Even the most abusive guy, let's go with the stereotype of a guy being the abuser, an abusive guy who supposedly just can't even control himself because she pushed his buttons and all of that other nonsense. When he's in court and the judge orders him to do some things he really doesn't want to do, I have been in court many times where these sentences were passed, and never once have I seen even the most abusive man flip the judge off, call him by a name, tell him to go screw himself, or anything like that. It's always, yes, Your Honor.
Mm.
Thank you, Your Honor. And
Yeah.
then he's let out of the courtroom. And I know that in the vast majority of cases, like 99.9% of the time, we are perfectly capable of controlling ourselves, but it's really about abuse. And abuse can be abuse whether I'm uh, doing it for you in order to help you be a better person by pointing out how really ugly you look in that outfit,
Mm.
or how much you need to lose weight, or and I'm just doing this for you because you look ridiculous when you dress that way, and especially with your weight, or when I'm putting you down for not having finished college, or for listening to the music you listen to, or having the friends that you have. It's all about control.
Mhm.
And
From the abuser wants to
yeah, the
control the.
abuser wants control of something that's really not in his domain
Mm.
or her domain, if we're going to be fair about it, because there are plenty. Sexism and abuse are both equal opportunity employers. And just as men can be abusive, so can women. And we might do it slightly differently, but it's far more alike than it is different. So when we talk about abuse, there's also an existential issue because, and this is probably the third reason why it really doesn't work in a sexual relationship that's ostensibly loving, is that when I become abusive, by the time I'm becoming abusive, I've really given up on my identity. because although I've interviewed many, many young people over my career, I have yet to meet any boy or girl who said when they grew up, they wanted to become big and strong and abusive.
Mm-hmm.
That is never a thing children dream of becoming. Instead, they do end up becoming abusive, and that's pretty much all of us. I think 100% of us have been abusive at some time or other in some way, large or small, chronic or isolated. When we're becoming abusive, we're completely turning our back on what we really wanted to do with our lives. None of us fantasize about becoming abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it becomes a habit, as it did for me in my life with my brother, and even lingering on later in my adulthood, it really destroys and undercuts the whole notion that I'm here to have your back, that I'm your partner, that I'm there for you, because we're not supposed to be attacking the people who are on our side.
Yeah.
But with abuse, that's exactly what we do. So I see it as a sexual issue, and it's not sexually adjacent the way maybe some other issues are. It's right there in the middle of it. So funny thing, couples, when they're doing their intentional interview, which I know we've talked about a few times on this podcast, they really don't ask the other person, so how do you handle your conflicts, within your relationships? Mm-hmm. Even if the other person has been in, say, a small handful of relationships and they're quite young.
Yeah, it's such a great question to ask too.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I want to know, I want to know their history. Like, what would you do when she was yelling at you? Or mm-hmm. What would you do when he called you names? I want to know what they did, because the past is the most accurate predictor of the future. And then asking them, well, is that how you would handle that today if you got in a relationship with someone like really wonderful who decided he wanted to abuse you, like, say, me? Mm-hmm. And most people are going to say no, and then you follow up with, so what would you do? Mm-hmm. And you can hear, if you listen, you can hear if it's a viable answer or not. A lot of people, well, I would just try to be better. Or, yeah. I mean, that's a non-answer. Mm-hmm. It tells me you haven't learned anything from the experience. So for me, it's one of those, despite my reading in the Tao this morning, I think there is a time for confrontation. And when somebody who has agreed to be in an abuse-free relationship, which is a promise I would want to elicit prior to any commitment to live together or be monogamous or anything else, I would want to know, well, are you willing to commit to an abuse-free relationship with me? And if they can't, then of course I'm out. But if they can and they fail to keep that commitment, then to have the confrontation go something like, well, gee, did you want to renegotiate our deal? What do you mean? Mm-hmm. Our deal to have an abuse-free relationship. Hey, I wasn't abusive. You forced me into that. Which is blaming the victim, or, attributing responsibility for my behavior to someone else, or minimizing my behavior, just flat out denying it. I wasn't being abusive when I called you those names. In fact, I had I had many guys, but one guy in particular I remember, and we were talking about abusive names, and he asked the question in a group setting, well, but what if she is acting like a bitch? Isn't it okay to call her a bitch then? Mm-hmm. And I have extremely vulgar responses to that are hysterically funny, and I don't feel are appropriate for a family-themed podcast. But there are many things. Oh, okay, here's one I could say that's pretty vulgar, but I think we might be able to slip it by if the kids can just be distracted for a minute. Most of us have grandmothers, or we at least at one time had a grandmother, perhaps someone delightful like Aunt B on Mayberry. And it's hard to imagine them being sexual, much less those grandmothers being sexually uninhibited and engaging in, say, oral sex. But never would I call my grandmother the name we would typically call someone who would engage in oral sex with a man, i.e., cocksucker. Mm-hmm. I would never say that because it's true, I would only say that kind of horrific statement to my grandmother if I were trying to demean, humiliate, and attack her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why something being merely true, that's just not good enough.
Yeah.
Even if I do think that, say, you are being selfish, or you are an idiot, or you are, any of these other names I want to lay on people sometimes, what makes it so very wrong, I think it's misusing a human being.
Mm.
Where we are not to judge one another, and that's one of the statements I do like from Christianity: "Judge not, lest you be judged." Because if you think about it, if you keep taking abuse, like people calling you names and putting you down, it's really just a matter of time before you respond in kind. Even a little 8-year-old boy who's being bullied by, say, a 12-year-old, he'll respond in kind. Do you remember the movie E.T.?
Yeah, of
And
course.
his big brother was so mean to him, uh, and the little brother called his brother penis breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably should have said that instead of cocksucker earlier about grandma. But
It's a very descriptive.
yeah,
I remember that
yeah.
phrase too.
And it was shocking, right? Because it was
Well, the idea that it conjures up, like, what is penis, bro? Like,
right, and
what is
it was shocking to me that it would be in basically what's a
PG?
kids movie.
Yeah.
But even the little young kid who would be very innocent is going to be free to make up verbal repartee that addresses the bullying of an older, bigger person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one reason why the tongue can be so very dangerous in our relationships, and why it hurts so many men who don't have, say, verbal abilities that equal their partners. They respond with physical abuse after taking a lot of verbal abuse. And really, that brings us to, well, so what am I supposed to do? Just sit there and take it?
Mm-hmm.
No. If your partner can't keep the commitment to have an abuse-free life, then it's really time to gather up your things and call a friend and move out.
Mm.
There's that other option of admitting you made a big mistake, that you thought you were with somebody who was loving and kind and supportive, and you were so very wrong. And then you have to commit to doing a much better job on your intentional interview next time.
So, do you think that that's the what needs to be done? Then they need to leave the relationship if they do try to have that conversation, and the person's resistant to it, and they have to make a call eventually.
This is so very hard for me to call because
Mhm.
context is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what would be going on in a given situation. So it's really hard to say. But I think if the person who's getting abused can remember, and I would even the person giving the abuse can remember, this is an absolutely unsustainable model.
Mm-hmm.
This little pattern of behavior, this horrifying shtick is going to cause more harm than it's worth. We both need to do something about it. We both need to find a way to talk about it. And sometimes, unbelievably, and I've got lots of stories of men who decided to embrace an abuse-free lifestyle after getting convicted of domestic violence and going to therapy for a while. They would go home and tell their mate, hey, I'm committed to an abuse-free life. I hope we can have an abuse-free relationship. And I remember one man in particular, he said his wife was so irritated and annoyed with him, she spit on him.
After he said that?
Yeah, after he said that. And of course, there's a backstory and a lot of context to that incident. And he did not hit her, and he did not yell and scream at her. But when he came back and talked about it, there are a lot of reasons why the smaller person, male or female, or the weaker person, weaker mentally or physically, might choose to do something really abusive and aggressive. And part of that is that sense of impending doom. They know that the abuse is coming no matter what happens. And so they just want, like the child who hands the belt to his dad because the mom has been promising, you just wait till your father gets home. He's going to beat the living tar out of you. Well, a lot of us just don't trust the other person to turn over a new leaf. And so we just, let's get it over with. We just want to get the abuse over with so we can get to the making up and the, day or two of good times before the next abusive explosion.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever it is, we do have to both get there. And it's hard because everybody's got some sort of power involved. When really, when you think about it, I mean, a loving relationship between two adults who are sexually into each other, it isn't supposed to be about power or control. It's supposed to be about love. That is the glue. And sacking your own quarterback or attacking your own spouse is not the way we win. So figuring out, okay, so what could I do? That's kind of an important one to figure out. And I would argue again with my colleague Benjamin Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth a
Yeah.
pound of cure. So doing this before we move in, doing this before we get into a committed monogamous relationship of whatever name, I think is essential because you got to have safe
Mm-hmm.
before you have good.
And how would you define the abuse-free life? Like it's abuse of obviously physical abuse and then emotional abuse, and then both people then have to agree on it and practice it. And like how does that work? Like and like because people eventually do cross the line or something, and then how do you have those conversations to get it back? And like
Yeah, really great question because it reminds me of all the things I haven't talked about, including, when you say what is abuse, it could be physical abuse for sure. I mean, that's definitely using someone the way we ought not to use a person. Verbal abuse, or what is often called emotional abuse, same thing there, where we're calling them out of their name, we're yelling at them, screaming at them. But it also includes sexual abuse. So that's most of us think about sexual assaults or crimes, and that's certainly abusive as well. But putting somebody down for the way they think or feel about sexuality, that would be, sure, emotional abuse, but it's of a specific nature
mm,
that a lot of times gets missed. If he finds out that she was sexually active beyond his comfort level, let's say, before that they were ever a couple, or she finds out that he really did love that other girl and it just didn't work out, and then to attack the person, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or I can't believe what a whore you were, or
mm,
whatever it is that
yeah.
people would say. That's some sexual abuse that isn't illegal, but it's definitely destructive. And I'm going to add one that doesn't come up a whole lot, but I think it's super important, and that's spiritual abuse. In a home that, for home to be home, it has to be a safe place. And it's really sort of the essential element of what we mean by home. It's a place where we go to be safe. That's why
Mm,
in baseball, home plate is you're safe if you
safe.
can reach that place. And for us to get home, we're supposed to be free of the fear of being attacked. But sometimes we are literally sleeping with the enemy. And spiritual abuse is is still abuse, and you could even call it emotional abuse, but it's the guilt trips and the put downs that you don't believe the right way, you don't
Mm,
have the right amount of zeal in the faith,
yeah.
you don't have an interest in godly things. You're too, and we can blend them with
Mm,
sexual abuse. You're always so carnally minded. Is sex all you ever think of?
mm-hmm.
So all of this stuff. Oh, here's another example: conversion therapy for those who are born with the wrong sexual orientation. That they need to be fixed because that's just a sin. And if you're homosexual, you're definitely going to hell. And that's just nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. So that's all abusive behavior. And and it doesn't matter what theology you subscribe to, because even if you're a born again, devout believer and Bible believing, you really don't know what God is going to do
Mm,
on the last day.
yeah.
You don't know who he's going to send to hell to burn for eternity because he loves them, or who he's going to, admit into the heavenly realm. So it's important to just not be judgy and let people simply be who they are. So we've got all these different ways we can abuse people.
And I just want to really go back to like the emotional side of the abuse, because one thing that you said, like you said before on other podcasts or in articles that you've written that you're kind of hardcore on it. Like even like eye rolling, you'll even define as abuse. And like those are things when I started working with you, I wasn't even aware of. And I was, you sometimes you're like, well, she's just in a mood, or she's not, she's just aggravated, or I'm being too sensitive, and like you kind of take it on, and these things kind of just accumulate with time, or just even like that sort of thing. Can we talk about the again?
Yeah.
It's like,
And if you do bring it up, you're at risk of being put down for not being a real man or for
mm-hmm,
being such a baby. I can't believe that you would, complain about that. After all, even kids can get away with that and not cry like you're crying about this.
mm-hmm,
So, yeah, there's been plenty of research out there that indicates the number one predictor of divorce in marriage counseling is the amount of disrespect or disdain
mm,
that the couple express to one another. And it's an extremely powerful predictor, and it is abuse. So I can be abusive. I think everybody listening to this can understand what it's like to be abused by simply a tone of voice that says in everything but words, I think you're an idiot for even
yeah,
asking that question,
yeah,
right? We've
mm-hmm.
all had that experience, sometimes in school,
uh,
getting scolded for asking a question the teacher found unacceptable. And that tone of voice is considered nonverbal behavior. It's not the actual words, even though it's a verbalization, from the voice box. It's considered nonverbal behavior. Well, other nonverbal behavior that indicates contempt or disdain would be the eye roll that you
mm-hmm,
mentioned, or just looking up and shaking your head in disdain, or putting on that what some people call the resting bitch face, or that look of disgust.
mm-hmm.
And another example would be, I think you brought up some more that were really good. And oh, yeah, making that sound of air leaking out of a tire.
Yeah.
I can't believe you said that. So when we treat each other like that, we're communicating, I don't respect you right now.
Mm-hmm. And that's destroying. It's not only abusive; it's also destroying intimacy, which we've discussed
Absolutely.
about.
Yeah. I mean, if that's a straight line connection there, because intimacy is the ability to safely share our lives with one another. And if we can't confront or just simply talk, share our feelings, share our experiences, talk about our version of events without getting that kind of response, then it's not safe. It's the opposite of intimacy. And I'm at that moment, I'm in the wrong place. Now I can confront on this, and we fortunately living the abuse-free life is actually very appealing if presented in the proper way.
Mm-hmm.
It holds a lot of promise because, well, we could be more of a couple than ever, and we could really be there for each other, and we could solve problems better because we wouldn't be attacking each other while we're trying to figure out if the kid should get roller skates or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, or be allowed to see ET
Yeah.
because of the language.
Yeah.
I think having, and the reason for that, there's always a reason, right? For all these things I'm sharing with everyone, the reason for that is when you attack me verbally or roll your eyes non-verbally or communicate disrespect and disdain in some way, my amygdala gets threatened. That part of the brain that monitors threat assessment 24/7, whether I'm asleep or awake, it's checking to make sure that the environment around me is safe. And even blind people have an amygdala that somehow gives them the ability to sense stimuli that is only visual. And we haven't figured that out exactly, but it's an amazing capacity of the human brain that we can do that. And far beyond chance, that they can take a pointer, like a laser pointer,
Mm-hmm.
and point to where an image of the snake is in a room,
Mm-hmm.
far more accurately than you would expect by hit or miss. They're far more accurate than that. So I think there's really something to all those kung fu movies where the blind guy, is able to beat up somebody
Yeah.
and sense where they are, because we're really quite aware. So if I'm arousing your survival instincts and you're either running to run or to fight, then you're really not going to be capable of higher brain function. And I'm asking the listener just to think about this. Think of a simple math test with a bunch of problems on it that you could solve under normal circumstances in under 60 seconds. And then think about doing that same math test or one of a similar difficulty level while someone is yelling horrible things at you or threatening you in a nonverbal way. Mm. And with the guarantee they're not going to touch you, but they're just behaving that way. And you won't be able to have the same level of performance, much less in more complex difficulties like talking about our sex life or our finances or whether the children should go to public or private school or should we stay religion free or attend the cult meeting this week. You know, whatever it is,
cult meeting,
whatever it is, we're going to do a better job as a couple, as a team, sorting through our problems if we're in an atmosphere that is accommodating of rational thinking.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that analogy.
Yeah, and it's like a recipe for success. You know, and that's why board meetings of executive committees that are entrusted with a lot of money, they don't function well when nobody obeys the rules. They don't make good decisions when somebody's banging his fist on the tabletop or threatening other people with the loss of their jobs or any of that kind of stuff. People make better decisions when they're free to think. We all do. And groups of people do. Or you could join a cult.
So with that abuse-free life, obviously there's all these dimensions to it. And how do you go about having that conversation? Like you said that you've had the conversation with your current wife, Sharon, and you asked her about it, and did she know about it, or how did that go? I guess, like, how do you, like, say you're in the intentional interview phase and you're looking to, because this person, the listener, is obviously, you know, they're way down.
Well, they're at various stages
Yeah.
of their journey in life, but
well, they're at a stage where they have to, like, either leave, or if the person's not going to be responsive, but
or they're single listening to this,
yes,
trying to mastermind success, you know, according to these kinds of ideas. And I think their odds are going to really go up. So if I'm a single person, the strategy is a little bit different, because as a single person, either on a first, second, or third date, at some time early in the dating, people routinely ask one another, or the subject comes up somehow, so what are you looking for in life? Or what are you looking for in a relationship? And if it doesn't come up, bring it up. Yeah. It's a really good question, and it'll tell you a lot about the other person. And one of the most reasonable and very short, easy to memorize answers is, well, I'm looking for an abuse-free relationship based on equality. And if the other person doesn't immediately say, what do you mean by that? You get to follow up with, and what I mean by that is, and you give lots of examples of what you mean. And one of the best examples, I think, when I was talking to women I was dating, I would explain that, well, can you imagine my being in a relationship with someone absolutely wonderful in a long-term committed live-in relationship? Someone, I don't know, let's say someone like you, as I point to her. And usually that gets a smile from the first date. And I come home unexpectedly early one day, and it's really not your fault, but I'm hearing a strange but rhythmic thump, thump, thump from the back of the house. And I go to explore because I don't know what that noise is. And I open the door, and there is my beloved and committed partner having sex with the next door neighbor. Well, my commitment to her, and if it were you, it would be you, is that whatever I do, I may shut the door, I may break out a camera and start a YouTube channel, I might go get some therapy or go talk to a friend or go for a walk. Whatever it is I do, I am not going to get abusive. I'm not going to yell, scream, I'm not going to throw things or try to beat somebody up. I'm not going to do anything like that. And my experience has been that most women are rather surprised by that, and they think that's rather an extreme but laudable commitment. Wow, that's really impressive. That's what I hear a lot of times. And I haven't even taken my clothes off yet. So I'm hearing, and I'm hearing, excuse me, I'm making myself laugh. I'm hearing that that's really impressive. And then I add, but I'm looking for that relationship to be based on equality. So that if, let's say, you're in a relationship with some wonderful guy, perhaps me, who knows, and you come home unexpectedly early, so I wasn't prepared, not my fault, that's on you. And there was a strange but rhythmic thump, thump, thump coming from the back of the house, and you went to explore, and you found me with the hot next door neighbor having sex, that you would be committed to the same kind of response that was abuse free. You might divorce me, you might leave me, you might walk out, go for a walk, and come back and see if I'm willing to talk about what happened. You might do any number of things, but whatever you do, you're not going to get abusive. And at that point, things kind of go from a smile to a really thoughtful response, because people are thinking about that. Could I do that? Mm-hmm. Is that even possible? And frankly, it's not always possible to maintain a 100% abuse-free life. I mean, I can think for myself, for the last 30 years, I've led what most people would call an abuse-free life. But I have to confess, there are times, and this is my ancient bugaboo. It always gets me, if anything does, and it's my tone of voice. I can use a sarcastic, demeaning tone of voice. Mm-hmm. And I just cringe when that gets called to my attention, because I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that kind of a guy. And especially not with the woman who's the nicest woman in my entire life, my wife. I don't want to do that. So when we fail, and we will fail, because this is a skill, and it's just a matter of getting better at it. When we fail, the proper response, when we realize it, or when we get called out and we realize it, is to render a thoughtful apology. I mean, a truly heartfelt apology, and a commitment to try again. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do that. And as long as the other person believes the apology is truly heartfelt, not one of those, okay, fine, I'm sorry, not one of those kind of apologies. If it's truly heartfelt, and we all know what real remorse looks like, mm-hmm. and we all know what real trying looks like, then most of us are willing to hang in there while that learning curve establishes itself. Because what typically happens, whatever level, and this is for the people already in a relationship, if you have this conversation with your partner, and your partner says, you know what, that thing about the amygdala made sense to me. I do want to solve our problems effectively and efficiently, so I'm down. Sign me up. And I'm doing this for me too, not for you, because I don't want to even be that guy. And she's delighted, or he's delighted, that the other person has responded this way. Let's say that last month was, on a scale of 1 to 10, or 10, and on a vertical axis, you put a little mark there, and then you go forward a month and rate the level of abuse after the first 30 days, looking backward the last 30 days. And is it still a 10, or is it something less? And my money says most of the time it's going to be a lot less, because it's on people's mind. Mm-hmm. And what typically happens is it'll even go down in the succeeding weeks and months. It'll go down to 0, but it won't stay at 0 perfectly. It'll spike up here and there. And the spikes will go to a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or even higher. But the spikes will, over time, if I don't give up, if I continue to hang in there and commit and try to keep this commitment, which is worth keeping, it's both truly spiritual and truly honorable, and it's going to help all of us, even if our relationship doesn't make it. The spikes will grow less and less frequent, and the duration of abuse-free life will grow longer and longer and longer. I think I'm down to something like once every few years. I might have a tone of voice I have to apologize for.
Okay.
And so it's, you know, we can't be too hard on ourselves and just say, no, I need to be perfect on this, or screw it, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't do this.
Yeah.
You got to be kind to yourself and give yourself a chance to learn a new skill. And this is hard because we live, especially here in 2023, oh my God, we live in an abusive time in American history where abusing people is the norm. I mean, we see it from our politicians, we see it in churches, we see it in media, we see it in intimate relationships, we see it in rom-coms. It's, you know, it's shocking when you watch, say, a TV show, even a sitcom, and there's still surprising levels of abuse. And I could give example after example. And when I first got started doing this work 30 years ago, I remember over 30, like 35 years ago, I remember I ran an experiment in my head. Like a historical research project, just watching the funny papers in the daily newspaper, and the amount of abuse that was going on in the name of humor.
Yeah.
Right. It was shocking because it was nearly daily. I mean, and some of these cartoons aren't even in the paper anymore, like Blondie or Beetle Bailey or The Wizard of Id or gosh, what are some of the others? I can't remember them all right now off the top of my head, but invariably there was some abusive behavior. Like Andy Capp, he and his wife used to go at each other with frying pans or fists or something like that. And in all of this, the trend about 95% of the time was that the humor was based on the physical abuse of a male. And that pointed to some sexist exception to the statement that abuse is always wrong, that it's never acceptable. Well, it's acceptable if it's for comedic purposes and the victim is a male. Then it's okay. But I'm glad to report, it's funny, life has gotten more abusive, and I think the funnies have gotten less abusive. So that's just a weird thing.
Yeah. So with all this too, like what I'm hearing, it's like, so it's not only like the abuse when you do minimize it and bring it down, that then allows couples to solve all the other problems that are, and there's going to be problems like in relationships or things that need to be resolved or conflicts that happen.
In fact, that's why we get into couples is to pool our resources and face life's challenges as a team. And by pooling our resources, we're better fit to be able to address those problems and overcome them, whether it's child rearing or growing our finances, or building a house, or running a farm, or whatever it is humans have tried to do. The family has been the unit that really makes that success possible. And it's much harder for everybody when we're on our own. It's doable with today's technology. I mean, I don't need to get married to have a woman to pull the plow while I'm, farming my farm or anything like that. It's doable. But it's essential that we do this in an abuse-free manner, because then I can enlist the brain of two rather than just the brain of one. In fact, I would even argue I sabotage my own brain when I get abusive because I'm not in a particularly thoughtful and contemplative frame of mind when I'm behaving abusively.
Yeah, you're really kind of like in a lower state of consciousness.
Well, that's what the new age people say. If you buy into all that nonsense. But yeah, it's sort of intuitively obvious, isn't it? We look at ourselves and you think back to the last, horrific argument you had with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and you realize, that wasn't really me at my smartest. So no, we're not really good at solving problems then.
And this idea too, it's not only relationships, but it goes on friendships, work environments. It's in every realm of life. Like from what I've experienced, like the abuse-free life, it's a commitment and it's a skill and it's something you have to practice and be aware of, take accountability of when you're abusive, when somebody is abusive towards you, you have to call out that abusive behavior. And it's something that not only you do in your relationship, but your friendships and your work relationships as best as you can. I mean, if you have an abusive boss, that's a whole nother story. But I mean, by doing that, you're clearing away the abuse from all of your life. And
You
by
know,
that,
yeah.
all of your whole life will increase and be much easier to solve the problems that come up because you don't have that abuse floating around in your mind.
Right, because it f's with my bandwidth. You
Yes.
know, if I'm fearing death, which is what abuse is, it's a form of foreplay that says I'm going to attack you. If I'm fearing attack, I'm not going to be able to be really mindful of, the annual budget or taking stock of the business's inventory or doing any of the other important things. But I think, in my answers so far, I've given short shrift to the couple who are already in a long-term relationship, maybe 5 years or more, and they've already, or even, gosh, less, because I've been in relationships that were abusive, and then the abuse started in the first year. And I think that for those people, you kind of have to pick a lane. You're either going to confront the person about their abuse right then and there and how it's wrong, and you're not going to take it anymore and be willing to back that up. But I think the more successful strategy would be to pick a day when the two of you are really getting along,
Mm.
and then having that meta conversation that we always talk about, where we go out to a restaurant and we're sitting there, and I just say, hey, I want to talk to you about something, and I was wondering if you'd be down for talking about something that we haven't really talked about. And what is that? Well, I'd like to talk about the two of us making a commitment to each other that we'd have an abuse-free relationship. Well, what do you mean? And then you get to explain what you mean and give examples, and hopefully you'll be as charming and as funny as I am, because it's
She's
real.
like, well, check it out. So if you come home and you hear a little thumping in the
Right.
bedroom,
No.
you're not going to freak out. Wait, what?
Right. You can't do it quite like that. You got to finesse those kinds of statements. But you want to make it invitational, because what you're offering the other person is a gift. It's a gift, and it's sort of a promise of coming attractions that are amazing and fantastic and are really going to take us to a higher plane, if I could borrow that new age expression. So the two of us are going to have a better life, but there's a downside, and that means one or more of us is going to have to give up control.
Mm.
So I won't be able to criticize your music when we get into the car. I won't be able to criticize your hairstyle when you come home with the new haircut. I won't be able to criticize your clothes for being too frumpy or too slutty as we go to the party. I won't be able to do all these things. And these are examples that really should, I think, come up in the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because it means really letting go. And for a lot of relationships, if you subtract all of the physical abuse, and you subtract all the emotional abuse, you subtract the verbal abuse and the spiritual abuse, down there at the bottom, at the end of that subtraction problem, there's a big goose egg of nothing. You got nothing in the relationship. You got a whole lot of abuse and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really scary for people who are not ready to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we have a history of having loved one another,
Yeah.
and of having been in love at one time. But the other part of this, I think, is worth it for the person who brings it up, because you're also giving another gift, and that's the consciousness of that this whole thing is abusive, and to be able to, it's a way of gently serving notice. You're aware of that, and only a very few number of idiots would think, and if I say no, she'll be down for that. She'll want to stay in the abusive relationship. Yeah, I mean, my cover's blown, and she notices that I'm really a jerk and I treat her contemptuously, but she'll get over that, because after all, we have kids. Or after all, we bought a house. Or after all, I make a lot of money. None of those things are worth living with an abusive person.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, talking about kids reminds me, and if for no other reason, learning how to have an abuse-free relationship teaches my children how to have abuse-free relationships. I have a son who's sat at the breakfast table listening to his mom and me talk about arguments and conflict for years and years and years. He's now well into adulthood, but I'm happy to say, of the many girlfriends he's had and of the many romantic relationships that haven't worked out, for the most part, he has sidestepped any abuse in his life.
Mm.
And I think that that's a remarkable achievement that I did not have at his age. So this is something we teach our children by living it out in our lives and talking about it on a regular basis, whether it's about our marriage or our relationship, or even something in the newspaper or something we saw at a party or from some other source, even a show on TV or a movie. I think it's important for our kids to learn what abuse is so that they too can be mindful as they go forward.
Yeah. And how did you come up with this idea of the abuse-free life? Like, was this after your first marriage, or when did you? Because it sounds like you started applying it when you were dating,
Well, what a
unless.
great question. And like the answers to so many of your great questions, the answer is that it did not come to me in a blinding flash of light one day, but it was like the drip, drip, drip out of a leaky faucet until
Mm,
finally there was enough water in the cup that I could take a drink and get a sense of quenching my thirst for what it was. I didn't know, but what it was is I was looking for safety.
mm,
I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't even have words to describe it, but I've had the privilege in my career of listening to thousands and thousands of people talk about their relationships. And we therapists in general, we get caught up sometimes in the details of a conflict, not paying attention to the stylistic overtones. So he said, she said, and now we're arguing about the content. But what about the style of how the content was presented? When he said what he said about, I'm not happy with your spending, makes a big difference if he was saying it in a screaming yell in her face.
mm,
And her response is going to be very different, um, or at least probably be very different, whether he's screaming it or just saying, we need to talk about something. At least I need to talk about it. You may not need to, but I need to because I'm going crazy over our money. And I think for me, listening to all of that, I realized so much of the time, my clients who really have never been idiots, I don't, my clients are all reasonably thoughtful, intelligent people who come to me quite often with problems that are actually very, very simple. And I remember feeling disoriented because I knew in at least part of my brain that these are problems they could handle. They don't need a therapist
mm,
to handle this problem. And then it was slowly, again, over time, I realized, oh, it's not that they're arguing. That's not a problem. It's not what they're arguing about. It's how they're arguing. And the problem is they haven't learned how to fight fair.
mm,
You know, we talk about boxing where, you know, even in a boxing ring where somebody could kill you. I mean, at least they could kill me if I walked into a boxing ring and, you know, knock my head in. Those guys are strong and they hit hard and fast, and people can get really hurt. But even in a boxing ring where people are trying to put you down, there are rules. It's not a fight according to the rules of the jungle
mm,
or the laws of the jungle, or might makes right. And so whatever I want to do, I'm going to do it, and you're going to have to take the consequences. There are rules, and what most of us don't have in our brains are the rules for fair fighting. We don't talk about this typically in the intentional interview, but I routinely give my clients a card, and it says on one side, conflict is an essential and inevitable part of every intimate relationship. And I'll repeat that in a moment because I think it's so important. I want people to write it down, but and to memorize it really, because the problem is not that we fight. Oh, I would never want to fight with you. I've had, I don't know how many girlfriends say that to me over
yeah.
my lifetime. But the problem isn't that we fight. The fighting is inevitable because any two people, even two buddies who get together, they're going to see life at some point from two different perspectives.
Mm,
And that's inevitable. And because of that, we have those two different perspectives. We're going to eventually arrive at two different senses of what the solutions to the problem are. And it doesn't, and in a romantic relationship, we all too often blame the fighting. Oh, mommy and daddy are fighting again. It isn't the fighting that's the problem. It's almost 100% the abuse that's the problem.
Mm.
The conflict is not a problem because if we can resolve the conflict, then we can more effectively draw near to one another and feel safe in doing so. But so conflict is an essential and inevitable part of every intimate relationship. If it's safe, there's going to be conflict. In fact, the opposite is true in relationships where there is no safety or no intimacy, and that would be, yeah, you better not say anything because I will kill you.
Yeah.
So there are those relationships that are conflict free, but none of us would want to be in one of those. On the other side of the same card, the three rules are the rules of fair fighting are no abuse, no matter what else we say, no matter what else we do. There's not going to be any attempts to control the other person. It's going to be more invitational and more, even I'll say, playful, because I'm trying to sell the other person on an idea that they have not yet accepted. And it might be, yeah, the kids really can have roller skates. I think it'll be fine. And if you're concerned, we could have them wear helmets. I already checked. They'd be glad to wear helmets, not in front of anyone else, but for a minute, they will wear safety equipment. And so that's rule number one: no abuse, do no harm. Right. So in rule number two, by mutual consent, we're going to fight by agreement. There are going to be no drive-by arguments. Like her hand is on the door, she's got to get out and get to work, and I say, you know what, your mother's a fucking pig, and I mean, them's fighting words, and so I need to knock that off. By the way, putting down someone's family, yes, is abusive, and so to be able to schedule fights, and this is another area where some of my clients go crazy because they think it's so unreasonable and that it's not even normal, it's not passionate, it's not spontaneous, it's like scheduling sex. But in fact, that's what boards of directors do when they're making billions of dollars. They schedule meetings, they talk about an interruption in the flow of production, they figure out what it is they need to do differently. Maybe they need to hire some new person or change a policy. And couples need to figure that out. That's where the quality decision making gets accomplished, is in those board meetings where we are talking according to some sense of rules and having some sort of civilized exchange. So we fight by mutual consent. And I say, I have a bone to pick with you. Is this a good time? And she says, no, not really. I have to go get my hair done. I have an appointment. And I say, well, okay, so when? And she says, well, what about this weekend on Saturday after breakfast when we're not tired or hungry? And big baby that I am, I'm like, yeah, that sounds really good. Not tired, not hungry. I'm totally on that page. So Saturday at 10 o'clock, we have a fight. And then what happens when Saturday finally comes around? A lot of times the fight is resolved. Or if it isn't resolved, it's a matter of, 10 minutes of conversation versus 3 hours of yelling.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to be said for solving problems rather than just duking it out until somebody is a winner and she stalks off to the bedroom while I won another one. But none of us win when the other person walks away upset.
Yeah.
There has to be a mutual agreement. So, no abuse by mutual consent. And the last rule is especially for guys, I say, but it's actually for men and women, any one subject, meaning that we can fight about anything. It could be, if she thinks that I cut my hair too short or she thinks that I'm dressing too weird, we can talk about that. I'm willing to talk about that because I'm pretty sure that's controlling behavior. That's not her business. But we can talk about our sex life, and we can talk about money and in-laws and all the other sensitive things that people often want to avoid, or they're dying to talk about, but they don't know how. any one subject. So the any is pretty clear, but just one at a time. I always joke that because I'm a guy, I'm not capable of multitasking. So I really need you to just stick to one subject instead of bringing up, well, last year when I had my birthday, you didn't, and then because now we're changing the subject and it's getting kind of global and I can't really compute all of that data. But I think to be able to talk about any one subject limits it in a way that's really helpful for men and women. Because none of us multitask. We've done the experiments, and even though many of us, have to do more than one thing at a time, it seems we don't do multiple things well at the same time. So if we're going to argue about the money, and we're going to argue about the sex, and we're going to argue about your friend who always comes over drunk, then we need to do that one at a time.
Yeah.
So those three rules, I think, will really do a lot to promote intimacy in the home and really help people engage in fighting with a free heart because they know, oh, it's safe to fight in this marriage. I don't have to be afraid of anything. I mean, most of us, men included, are just really afraid of getting into a fight or an argument or a confrontation because we in our minds we confuse the one with the other. We confuse conflict resolution and confrontation with abuse. And they're two entirely different concepts.
Yeah. And then that with all the stuff that you've been absorbing as a therapist with your clients, you came up with that. And then that was tied into the abuse free life, of course. And then you just started applying these things in your own life too.
Absolutely. And in fact, I always tell my clients that everything I've ever, in fact, I think it's true still to this day, everything I've ever asked of a client is something that I've tried myself because fortunately for me, I think I was born with nearly every problem under the sun, or I've had every defect of character that's led to every problem under the sun. So in looking for solutions in my own life, I wanted them to be truly workable, not idealistic or a simple solution. Just read this 400-page book with these 47 steps, and you too can have a great life or a great marriage or a great whatever. And when things are too complicated, it kind of, I think, gives the lie to a real big truth. We humans are a social species. Of all the things we're not particularly good at, we are really good at relationships. The only problem is that we've not been taught the basics. And learning how to fight fairly, learning how to have an abuse-free relationship, that's getting pretty darn basic. Even children can be taught this.
Yeah. Well, that's what's cool about it. It's simple once you understand it. And I also like that you learned it through your own failures and your career of 35 years and counting, and then you've also applied it in your own life. So it's like it's a good
yeah, it's been combat tested.
Yeah, it's been tested yeah, numerous ways and like
right.
kind of brought through. And it's like it's telling people how, hey, if you want to have a relationship that's really working in a healthy way on all levels, these are kind of the ways to do that. And the abuse free life is one of the keys to all of this.
Yeah, and what if the person you're with doesn't want to have that abuse free relationship and they give an excuse like they don't think it's possible, so they're not even willing to try, or, well, maybe that's a good idea, but I'm Irish, or I'm a redhead, or in my family we're all German, or but we're Italians, and everybody's got some sort of a myth in their background that enables the abuse to continue. When you're faced with that, I think it's really time to look in the mirror and admit to yourself that this may not be sustainable. You can go on and book an appointment with somebody who might be able to help you. But frankly, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know more than most therapists know about this subject. Because therapists might be nice, but many therapists don't really know how to have an abuse-free life. because it's not something we're routinely taught at the university in grad school programs. And yet, when you scratch your head, you wonder, well, why not? I mean, shouldn't we be empowering our clients so they can solve their own problems and they don't have to come to a therapist? Because most of our problems are human problems capable of human solution. So they're not really all that complicated. And I admit there are things over our head, like therapists can help people with mental illness or with a child born with some sort of disability or behavioral problem they haven't faced. But I think at the end of the day, we can all agree there's not a single problem in our lives that is somehow magically going to get better with the judicious addition of some level of abuse. If I could just yell at somebody, that it would get better. No, that's never going to happen.
What do you mean, Steve? Okay. You jerk, you penis.
Right? There's like nothing that's going to get better.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you're making a joke, and in my marriage, that's what abuse is. We joke about it. Even my son, he'll hear us discussing something seriously, like how to make a podcast better or something, and he'll say facetiously, "I hate it when mommy and daddy fight."
Yeah.
And he's in his mid-30s.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's a joke around here because we feel so safe from abuse that we can joke about it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks again for sharing that with us. And the abuse-free life, I highly recommend living it. I've been putting it into practice since I started working for Steve, and it's a journey you kind of go on, and it's definitely worth it. So thanks all for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.